there's a field. It is a subtle energy field, and information is stored in that field. Our neurons are the antenna that tune to very specific places in that field. DNA does the same thing. So, for example, when we want to learn something new, if you're trying to learn a foreign language, or I'm a musician, you're a musician, we're trying to learn a piece of music, and we're trying to mimic what somebody else does. And the first few times you do it, you go through the motions and it feels awkward, or you're speaking a foreign language and you're saying syllables that just sound weird. All of a sudden, you wake up one morning and, man, you're thinking in Spanish, you're thinking in French. Or all of a sudden, you wake up one morning and you're playing like Steve Vai, my hero, on the guitar. And people say, well, what happened in that time? Well, this is fascinating to me. If you watch the time-lapse photographs of neurons trying to connect, neurons are very social cells. They want to hook up, and they're looking for another neuron to hook up with. That doesn't happen instantly. It takes about 72 hours, about 3 days, for the dendrites to connect and find others. So here's what's actually happening. It is the act of you or me or anyone watching this to learn something new, to become something more, to better ourselves, to become something more in the next moment than we were in the last moment. That drive, that compulsion that we feel is the trigger. It's the command for the neurons to find other neurons to create the antenna that tunes to the place in the field that holds what we're asking ourselves to master. Does that make sense if I say it that way? It's amazing to see this happen. And this is why a lot of young people today, new generations, their parents will say, man, my kids, they're having a hard time learning because things don't come quickly to them. They want to learn right now. And what I say to them is stay with it and allow the process. Give them 3 days. Ask them to stay with it for 3 days and see if it doesn't get better. And it does, whether you're trying to learn math, science, art, music, a language, whatever it is. So this is important. We need our biology to connect to the information in the field. Divinity is part of that information. Our intuition, our creativity, what some people call your higher self when you're praying or when you're meditating. What you're actually doing is your physiology, what our ancestors called the temple. This is the temple, the vessel that holds the antenna. We are communicating with that part, that place in the field where many people have come before us and are also communicating with that place in the field. This is why when you begin to replace the natural biology with synthetics, there are no longer neurons. There's no longer DNA. And what that means is there's no longer antenna. So we still may function in this physical world. We have now been veiled. I don't want to say it's completely lost, but the access is veiled, more difficult to get to for our intuition, our conscience that knows what's right and wrong and good and bad, and the ability to communicate with other forms of life on subtle levels, other dimensionalities on subtle levels, the ability to meditate and elevate ourselves in those levels. All of that, innovation, creativity, imagination, all of that begins to atrophy. If we don't use, and this is the danger, and the science is showing us, if we don't use those parts of ourselves now, so for example, computer chips are put into the brain, into the neocortex, and they begin to replace mirror neurons. And we'll talk about mirror neurons a little bit. It's a class of neuron. What the studies show really clearly is the new discoveries is that the human brain continues to produce neurons until the last breath we take on this planet. We used to be told, when I was in college, I was told, you've got X number of neurons, and every time you drink a beer, you're going to lose a bunch. So that was the leverage, not to have a beer or whatever it was you were doing. Now we know that's not true. That we continue to produce them until the last breath of life. However, and this is the caveat, if a new neuron is produced and it is not engaged in a meaningful way, within about 14 days, it will atrophy and die because it feels like it's not needed. If we have AI virtual visors in our children that are entertaining them, everything is being done for them. So you got a 3-year-old sitting on the floor in the living room after breakfast with a visor for hours, watching extraordinary scenes and vivid colors and sounds they would never see in the natural world. But here's the thing, it's all being done for them. They're not engaging their imagination. They're not engaging their creativity. They're not engaging their problem-solving skills. All they're doing is being entertained. And what happens is the brain cells that are not engaged begin to atrophy. So now psychologists are publishing papers of young kids that are doing just this, and they have cognitive impairment because everything from motor skills to language to socialization, the visual cortex is thickening because that is the part of their brain that's being used. When we fail to engage our divinity in a meaningful way, those parts of us begin to atrophy in one generation. Next generation, your body says, oh, we didn't use these much. Maybe we don't need this anymore. And it becomes an appendage of a skill that we used to have. This is how you lose a species. It's exactly how you lose a species because it's happening on the genetic level as well, with reproduction, with immune response, all of these kinds of things. So the point is that it's through our natural biology that we have access to our divinity or to our ability to transcend our perceived limitations. When our natural biology is replaced, then those skills either begin to atrophy or we lose access altogether to that field.